I am delighted that you are here. You are at the second day of the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference from the UW-Madison School, Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work. I'm Laura Dresser, and I'm delighted that you are in this breakout panel. For a personal visual description, I'm a late 50s white woman with straight blonde hair, brown glasses, got a green shirt and a gray or white and black jacket today. I'm really thrilled that you are here to learn from this panel. This panel is named Immigrant Dairy Workers in Wisconsin from Awareness to Action. Thank you for being here. I want to start with an acknowledgement of the land that we at the UW-Madison are on. I know that you might be near here or you might be far. I want you to take this as an opportunity to learn a little bit of the history of UW-Madison, but also to consider the land that you are on. The University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work occupy ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Teejop since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. I just want to say, I think it's especially important in this conference about social workers as we consider the role of the profession in the attempted cultural genocide through the boarding school system and other systems in the history of this profession. I think we need to grapple with what we see in our own past and be looking for those sorts of blind or those sorts of lack of ability to see deep injustice and correct it even today. This conference is about that. This presentation, you all should know, is being recorded and will be available on our conference website early next week. A few Zoom information items for you to access this presentation. You were required to provide your name and email. This allows us to log attendees and email you information on this CEUs for this presentation. These will be distributed via email at a later date. Do not worry. When you came in the room, you gave us email. That's how we get you your CEU. So I know a lot of people want to know the CEU story. That's the CEU story. The cameras and microphones will remain, your cameras and microphones will remain muted. There's a Q&A feature, and that is the question and answer feature is where you can submit questions for the presenters. It is unlikely because of the large volume of questions that these panels tend to generate. It is almost impossible to get to all questions, but definitely put questions in the chat. We will try and get to them. And at this point, I guess I want to extend my gratitude to this panel, specifically these 5 individuals who are going to have a conversation today about immigrant dairy workers in this state, some of the violations and some of the incredible work that communities are doing to correct and to thrive in this state, and the way that social workers are involved in that. I'm going to hand this over to Brenda Gonzalez, who's the University of Wisconsin Director of Community Relations. She'll be the facilitator of the panel. And I will get to listen like the rest of you and see you at the end when we close out. I hand it over to Brenda.
Thank you so much, Laura. I apologize, everybody, for my voice. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. I'm excited to be here. My name is Brenda Gonzalez, as Laura mentioned. I'm currently serving as the Director of Relations and Community Relations and Government Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My pronouns are she, ella. I'm a Latina Mexican woman with dark hair, short shoulder length hair. that is excited to be here talking about this particular issue of immigrant dairy workers in Wisconsin, moving from awareness to action. Such a powerful title. I have been in this community for over 20 years, always thinking about working on how to actively contribute to fostering connections through collaborative efforts. So certainly not an expert in this area, but the dot connector. Hopefully that makes sense for everyone. And I'm excited to be here as my own experience as an immigrant, that I am interested in learning and hopefully get more information about what is currently happening in this particular community. So let me just share a little bit more about my own history here. I've been in the community for about 20 years. My history on campus actually includes serving as the Health Equity Career Development Program Manager with the Collaborative Center for Health Equity and the School of Medicine and Public Health. Just to share a little bit more and to move forward to the introductions to the great panel that we have today. I'm so interested because I study social psychology in college, so I'm always connected to the social workers, and those are the certainly the angels that I always see in my life as I cross paths with many of them. So just to share a little bit more, and before we start with the introductions, I just want to say that the structure of this next hour or so is going to be our experts in the panel will introduce themselves and will share different perspectives on one, what's happening today in our local communities around this issue with from their area of expertise. I think it's going to be very important to clarify that. And of course, moving forward, then we'll go into some of the general topics that we'll talk about ways to support immigrant workers and their families. And then at the end of the conversation, hopefully we can just hone in what is the role of the social worker in this area. I hope that that structure makes sense. Of course, during the period of our time together in the discussion, we have the opportunity to ask questions or clarifications of some of the in some of the areas or some of the points that the experts are making here. Certainly at the end, we'll see Laura again, and she will help us close the time together that we have. So just to give you a little bit of a brief introduction, I know that you have read this in the agenda, but just to share that in the before the certainly the privilege of introducing this panel, I just want to share a few things here. In communities nationwide, immigrants often find themselves navigating unsafe and sometimes unlawful working conditions, facing challenges in accessing services and confronting hostility and policy shortcomings. Despite federal and state level failures to improve the safety and security of immigrant lives, a glimmer of progress has emerged at a local level. In November of 2023, Dane County made a groundbreaking $8 million investment in housing for immigrant dairy workers. This investment not only addresses policy failures within the dairy industry, but is also deeply rooted in a long-standing local commitment to supporting immigrants and facilitating their connection to essential social services. This panel seeks to drive into the compelling narrative behind the historic investment, shedding light on why and how it transpired. It's going to be very important to highlight that. Additionally, it aims to prompt contemplation on the potential translation and application of the lessons collected today for this story on other communities grappling with similar challenges. The panel will discuss their individual and unique perspectives, including, and it includes the writers who have documented the harsh conditions faced by immigrant dairy workers, a Dane County Board member who led the investment drive in response to the documented crisis, and the leader of Dane County Immigration Affairs Department. Certainly those are the members of the panel that you will hear more from. So the emphasis will be placed on extracting valuable lessons, identifying principles for action to stand in solidarity with immigrant workers, and discussing the essential role of social workers in advocating for the safety and security of immigrant workers and their families. So now let's go and hear a little bit from each one of them. just the general introduction, a little bit about your work and how you have been investing your time and professional experience and expertise, and just a general introduction. Melissa, I wonder if you don't mind starting with your introduction and just a little of a brief general remarks.
Sure, thank you, Brenda. I'm Melissa Sanchez. I'm a reporter with ProPublica. We're a nonprofit investigative news organization. I'm a Latina woman, dark skin, dark hair, pulled into a messy ponytail, wearing a brown sweater in my home office. I've been with ProPublica for the past 6 years or so, and I've been in journalism for close to 2 decades, often writing about immigrants and low-wage work, probably because I'm the daughter of immigrants who are low-wage workers. I'm based in Chicago, and the stories that I wrote with a colleague, Mariam Jamil, were published in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and Gannett-owned newspapers across the state, so you might have seen some of them. I got interested in immigrant dairy workers a few years ago when I'd heard about a fatal fire in Michigan at a house where immigrant dairy workers lived. It was a house provided to them by their employer. And 2 men died. They were undocumented immigrants from Mexico. I haven't written about this case yet, but I became interested in what happened because I learned really quickly that there's basically no federal or state inspections or regulation of housing for dairy workers when it's provided by employers. And it's worth noting that for other kinds of farm workers, like seasonal crop workers, the people who pick apples or cherries or asparagus, that kind of housing is regulated by the government. Dairy workers, for a lot of different reasons, are left out of a lot of the protections that exist for other kinds of workers. And the dairy industry is largely made up of undocumented workers, so that's like a double whammy for these folks, because immigrant status also affects people's ability to assert the limited rights that they do have. And as we learn more about dairy, we focused on Wisconsin for obvious reasons. It has more dairy farms than any other state in the country, and I live in Chicago, so it's very close to get here. And to kind of do the reporting, we started by requesting records both from OSHA, the federal agency that is supposed to oversee workplace safety, and local law enforcement agencies across the state. When I knew of an accident from news reports, I would request the underlying, like the local police response or local law enforcement, local sheriff's department response. And it was in that process that I learned about what happened to a little boy named Jefferson Rodriguez in Dane County. And he was an 8-year-old kid who had come with his father in early 2019 from Nicaragua. And like a lot of Nicaraguans who were coming at the time, his dad, Jose, got a job on a dairy farm. It was a small farm, 500 or so cows. And he found a job in the milking parlor. He also lived in the milking parlor. Him and his son moved into a little room above the parlor. And this is like a barn. It's inside of a barn where cows are moving in and out all day. They weren't conditions. They weren't adequate or safe conditions for anybody, let alone a little child. And again, nobody inspects dairy farm housing. So that was immediately interesting. And while Jefferson's dad worked, Jefferson ran around the property unsupervised, basically. And one night, a worker on his first day on the job, in the dark, with a machine that might not have been working properly with faulty lighting, this new worker accidentally killed this boy. And when the sheriff's office went over to investigate, they made a deputy who spoke proficient Spanish, or who identified as speaking proficient Spanish, when she interviewed Jefferson's dad, who was absolutely hysterical with grief, she misunderstood him, and she asked a question and made a grammatical error, which sounds kind of silly to say out loud, but she made a fatal error in the way that she asked a question, and she misunderstood what happened that night, and she thought that this man accidentally ran over his child. And the case was ruled an accident, but Jefferson's dad was blamed for what happened, and nobody questioned what happened until we wrote a story about it. We explained what happened. We talked to the deputy. We realized there was a grammatical mistake because we speak Spanish, and we could ask those questions. We spoke to the man who accidentally killed this boy. It's worth noting that after Jefferson died, the state's child welfare system was notified of the death, but from as far as we could tell, nobody investigated or tried to clarify what happened. And so we wrote the story as a narrative that highlighted a lot of the problems immigrant workers face, from unsafe work conditions to housing to these language barriers. And I want to note that this is a civil rights issue, that people are entitled to access to federally funded agencies, including the Dane County Sheriff's Office, and language is critical to that. So it's a big deal when there's a language failure like this. After we published the story, we reached out to local elected officials, including Heidi and other supervisors on the board, and were absolutely stunned by the response. And I'll let Heidi talk about that in a minute. But I really hope that what happened in Dane can serve as a model for other parts of the state, because the same things are happening everywhere. And I'll just quickly mention that a lot of our other reporting over the course of the year on dairy workers, whether it was on safety at work or the driver's license issue, undocumented folks can't access driver's licenses, just is really, really important. And it affects, I think, people's ability to live well. And as we see more immigrants coming into places like Wisconsin, asylum seekers, et cetera, I just think, and local law enforcement agencies are struggling to respond to them adequately, that these are just problems that we're going to continue to see in places like Wisconsin. So I'll leave it to Heidi. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for sharing this kind of also an introduction, if you will. I know that in the chat, we are having some questions that are being posted, but I know that many of them are being addressed or answered. Please continue to share your questions. If they're not going to be able to, we are not going to be able to answer them here directly. We will find a way to share some of the updates and information for sure. So now let's go to our next presenter, Ruth. I wonder if you don't mind introducing yourself and then sharing a little bit about that background.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm Ruth Conniff. I am the editor of the Wisconsin Examiner, which is a state news outlet, part of the state newsroom network of news outlets around the country. I am here to talk about dairy because I wrote a book called Milked: How an American Crisis Brought Together Midwestern Dairy Farmers and Mexican Workers. And I just want to say, I think Melissa's reporting is astounding and phenomenal. So I'm honored to be on the panel with her and hear about her continuing work in this really important area. I started working on my book. My family and I decided to move to Mexico shortly after Donald Trump took office in 2017. And we spent a year living in Oaxaca, which was wonderful. And right around the time that we left, I read a newspaper article in the Wisconsin State Journal by Alex Hall from Wisconsin Watch that described a family of workers from Mexico packing up on a dairy farm and deciding to make the drive all the way back to Veracruz, where they were from. They had been in Wisconsin for a couple of decades. They had some US-born little boys, and the ICE crackdowns in their area in Western Wisconsin and just the insecurity that they felt in an increasingly hostile political climate for immigrants was part of the driver for their decision to go back to Mexico. Reading that article was the first time that I discovered the statistic that 80% of the labor on dairy farms in Wisconsin is performed by immigrants, mostly undocumented immigrants, and mostly from Mexico. And I was astounded that 80%, I mean, this is an industry that would collapse overnight without its undocumented workforce. So when I was in Mexico, I contacted Alex Hall, and she put me in touch with her sources for that story. And I went and visited some of the workers, including Luisa Tepole, who was one of the people featured in her article, who had gone home. And she described what's really a classic story of circular migration. You know, there have been Mexican workers in agriculture in the United States since before World War II, officially under the Bracero program. People would come, follow crops, go back to Mexico. They didn't have an American dream. They had a Mexican dream. They would make money in the United States and build homes and businesses back in Mexico. And that is a lot of what's happening in the Wisconsin dairy industry with workers. With the militarization of the border, it's harder to go back and forth, and people are here for a much longer period of time. But a lot of the people in my book, I ended up writing a book that's basically interlocking chapters of biographies of dairy workers and dairy farmers. A lot of those people were really looking at the long-term plan to go back to Mexico. And of course, it's complicating when you stay a long time in another country and then your kids are born there, and then they're now high schools, US teens and high school students, and it's harder to stick with that plan. So there are a variety of outcomes for people in my book. Some go back, some stay. Some are in a just perpetually ambivalent situation. But I became very interested in Luisa Tepole's story, and also in the story of the farmers in Wisconsin who just over the last 2.5 decades had begun to hire this immigrant workforce. So it's really it's a history that you can talk to people about and discover in the short term. It is really because of the pressure to get big or get out in agriculture that a lot of smaller family farms grew their workforce really quickly. They had never hired any employees before. They'd been entirely family run, and they began looking for employees. And there were immigrant workers who were working in the Christmas tree farm industry who were interested in longer term year-round jobs, and they moved over to dairy. And that was the beginning, really around the late 90s, early 2000s, that we began to see the rise of this 80% of the workforce being an immigrant workforce. There is no such thing as a year-round visa for low-skilled agricultural work. So pretty much all of these workers are undocumented because the Congress has just failed, and there have been repeated attempts, has failed to pass legislation that would recognize an economic relationship that is well established over the last couple of decades. So that's the reason that we're looking at an undocumented workforce in dairy in Wisconsin. I think the most interesting thing to me in writing my book was learning about sort of the degree to which you have two groups of rural people in Wisconsin, which has long been the #1 state for farm bankruptcies in the country, where we've lost more than half of our dairy farms since 2014. There's two groups of rural people who are under pressure from the same global economic forces that are beyond their control. So farmers scrambling to grow their operations and stay in business, and then workers after NAFTA, many of whom were driven off their land as the United States dumped cheap subsidized corn on Mexico, looking for work, crossing the border, making these unbelievably dangerous crossings, and working side by side with a lot of the farmers. The farmers in my book are running pretty small operations, so there is less of a hierarchical kind of big employer running a huge operation system than there is, say, in California, where farms are on average 10 times the size that they are in Wisconsin. So we're kind of earlier in time in some ways in agriculture in Wisconsin than some other states. One of the first sources that I connected with in writing my book was Sean Duvall, who's a Spanish teacher in Western Wisconsin, who started a nonprofit group called Puentes Bridges. She was asked to start translating on farms. She teaches Spanish in a little high school in Alma, Wisconsin, and she started traveling around to farms and helping to translate early in this time period when this immigrant workforce was becoming a bigger phenomenon. And then she got the idea, she taught some Spanish classes at night to farmers, and she taught some English classes at night, and neither were particularly well attended by either the farmers or the farm workers. She decided to take the farmers to Mexico to do a Spanish immersion program. She took them on a trip to Cuernavaca. They spent a week living with families and trying to learn Spanish. And at the end of the week, they met with some of their workers' families, and they were so amazed by that experience, seeing the homes and businesses that their workers were building back in Mexico, that became the focus of Puentes Bridges, which is an existing nonprofit. They've been taking trips to Mexico since 2001. I went on a trip in 2019 and just spent a bunch of time both with the farmers and the workers who are part of that Puentes Bridges program, and learned their stories. And I think in some ways, it was a surprisingly hopeful story, and this is not the same story that Melissa is telling, which is really the dark side of this very unequal exploitive situation where you have a workforce that has no rights and no protections, and so obviously terrible things happen to people. But I also think there are a lot of people who feel really proud of what they've done coming here, and that they have built something really powerful back in their home communities. And it's really these workers who are carrying the economies of two places on their backs. They're carrying the economy here and the entire dairy industry here and their hometowns. So I feel like it's important, to include that perspective and to honor that, because there are some incredible people who have really incredible life stories and who are working really hard. And it just belies the rhetoric at the national level right now about how somehow the United States is threatened by immigration and, needs to be building higher walls at the border. In fact, U.S. employers absolutely demand the labor of these workers, and that is a huge driver of immigration. And in some ways, there are there's kind of a shared agrarian past between the farmers in my book and the workers who are working on their farms, and they had discovered that they have some fundamental things in common, and so that was a very interesting story for me to uncover as well. So I can say more later, about all of that. I guess one thing that I just did want to say is one of the interesting statistics that I learned in reporting for my book was that even as between 2004 and 2022, the number of dairy farms in Wisconsin decreased from 16,000 to 7,000. The number of cows stayed exactly the same at 1.2 million. They're just moving on to bigger and bigger operations. And that gives you a little window into sort of what this get bigger, get out trend is and how it has driven, this frantic search for people who are willing to do this really hard work. So
hard work for sure, Ruth. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like we need a separate presentation for each one of you. I'm interested in podcasts, so I will hopefully, hear you in some of those podcasts. You're amazing. All of the work that you both are doing, Melissa and Ruth, are incredible. So now, Heidi, I wonder if you don't mind then going next, a little bit of the, again, introduction of your work, and also kind of like the context, if you will, of your involvement in this particular topic.
Sure. Thanks, Brenda. I'm Heidi Wegleitner. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a 44-year-old white woman with shortish, asymmetrical brown hair. I'm wearing round glasses and a black sweater. I represent District 2 on the Dane County Board, which is an urban district of about 15,000 people on the near northeast side of Madison, and I've been serving in that capacity since 2012. I got started in local politics as an activist organizing for fair and affordable housing, anti-racism and anti-poverty efforts, and workers' rights. Way back in law school, I did a clinical where I represented immigrant refugees in removal proceedings. And I did a little bit of immigration law contract work out of law school, but that was, over 18 years ago. And I'm definitely not an expert on this subject, but I have been practicing housing law as a legal aid attorney for the past 18 years. And last February, I was sitting here at my kitchen table where I do work when I'm working from home, and drinking my coffee when I came across Melissa and Miriam's ProPublica article. And I was gripped and horrified and crying into my coffee, and just shocked that, this had happened, I think, 3.5 years before I was even reading that article. And it's the first time I had heard the story of Jefferson Rodriguez and his father. And was just wondering, how could that be? How could I not know? I felt really ashamed, and it was very telling to me as to how kind of isolated and marginalized the community of immigrant dairy workers has been. And then I reached out to other folks that I knew from in the legal aid office, in local politics, and they said the same thing. And then I was really like, oh my gosh. So I wasn't sure what to do, but I just started emailing people and said, have you read this story? And thankfully, Melissa and Miriam were also emailing some of these same people saying, we want to follow up on this. We wrote this story to, I think, motivate a response and action. And so, excuse me, we did, try to pull together different county supervisors and staff, and including Fabiola, to try to pull apart all the different failures of systems and policy exposed in Melissa's reporting, and figure out what we at the county level can do. I mean, obviously, immigration is largely a matter of federal law, right? And as county, unfortunately, we can't legislate that. But this happened in rural Dane County. And we have a lot of dairy farms in Dane County. And so I found out some things. I found out through the course of these meetings, and we created this big brainstorm list, but I realized that even like farm worker advocates didn't know where all the dairy farms were. So even if the advocates or county services wanted to do some more intentional outreach, where would we begin? Well, like, we didn't even have a map. So, one thing that came out of those early meetings is pulling, using our land information system for our planning and development department to actually develop a map of the dairy farms in Dane County. I realized obviously language access is a huge issue here in this situation, and something, many folks working with immigrants, Fabiola and so many others realize is a big gap for so many in Dane County, but realizing that throughout county government, we didn't have a coordinated language access program or protocols. Each sort of department, division, program was kind of on their own or doing their own thing, with a real range of procedures and development. We had, and there were other folks that have been working on this in county government, and Human Services had, I think, one language access coordinator that had just started. But we were like, this really, we need to have a centralized space, that somebody who's kind of coordinating all these efforts. It doesn't make any sense for a large county to not have a clearinghouse and center place. So that was really interesting. And then, of course, the need for safe housing, right? That the thought that an 8-year-old boy would be living in a milking parlor in a barn, pretty shocking. And I had been working in the area of homelessness prevention as a tenants' rights and eviction defense attorney for several years, serving on boards and things. But this housing insecurity, this issue, was not something that was ever really talked about in that space, So we had, a priority of creating, new safe and affordable housing, and really increased funding over the last several years to do that. But this is not a population that was going to be benefiting from those more conventional affordable housing programs. So when we were thinking about, what do we do? Obviously, there's so much that needs to be done, and I think we'll talk more about some of those other things. But we wanted to make sure we had some budget initiatives for the 2024 budget to get something moving, a meaningful, tangible response. And I mean, one of those things is a new language access coordinator position in Dane County's Office of Equity and Inclusion. It was really important to the county board that this position be in that office, because we didn't want it to just be like an internal compliance focused, very important for sure, but we also wanted it to be real, external, how we are working with, engaging communities most impacted by the lack of language access, right? And so having it there, of course, we need a lot more support and staff for that, just like we need a lot more staff and support in Fabiola's Office of Immigration Affairs. But starting that program in that place with the intent to coordinate countywide, I think was really critical. And then we were able to get $8 million in our capital budget to start a safe farm worker housing program. And, I think the first phase of that is will really be to study the nature of the problem, what's needed, really with a focus on those that are most vulnerable and not able to access other conventional housing programs because of immigration status, for example. So that's in its very early stages, but I'm really excited that the county board, stepped up to put aside a significant budgetary commitment to develop that housing. It's going to take some time to actually figure out exactly what we're going to do and get that open. But I think it's an important first step, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Heidi. Very important, right? And a lot to do, a lot more to do. It's so interesting because, of course, I've been in this country for 20 years, and I feel like we're getting there, and then we still need a lot more. But I'm so glad that some of these opportunities about talking of some of these issues and presenting some of the stories in a very broadly way to different experts that maybe will create a change, will make a difference in what we can do next. So thank you so much for that presentation, that information in detail. Now, Fabiola Hamdan, Fabi, do you mind again introducing yourself and then going a little bit more into the background that you have for this particular topic?
Sure. Thank you, Brenda. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Fabiola Hamdan. I'm a middle-aged Latina woman. I'm working from my office today. So in the background, you'll see some college pictures and some other ones. I have a very tiny office, and the color is kind of bluish. I'm wearing a blue shirt and blue earrings. I like to match. And glasses too. I think they're square glasses. So I'm a social worker for the past 25 years, and I really like tell you a little bit about my story, right? So I arrived to this country from La Paz, Bolivia, 37 years ago. At that time, I was uncertain of my future. I did not speak English, facing the challenges of many of the immigrants that arrived here. On top of that, my mom was undergoing a very difficult brain tumor surgery. As a family, we lived through a painful recovery from surgery, radiation, the constant ER visits, fearing for the worst. Things turned out around and she recovered. Now she lives here in Madison along with my father, my brother, and my sister. So a little bit more about myself. I was certainly able to overcome many barriers, and I was lucky to obtain my master's degree in social work from UW-Madison. So my main thing, is to help and advocate for families in need, because I went through that myself and with my family. I think I am very fortunate to have the job I have, because it really gives me an opportunity to meet people whose lives are very vulnerable and sometimes full of sorrow, sadness. And I want to at least be a glimpse of connecting them with some resources and really try to assist as much as I can. A little bit more about myself. My husband is from Jordan. I'm in Jordan. We met here at UW. I have two boys, Malik and Nabil. They are the light of my life. And yeah, so I basically consider myself, my heart always is in Bolivia, but I consider myself a citizen of the United States, which took me about 9 years to become a US citizen. So currently I am the supervisor of the Immigration Affairs Office. I started this job at the end of 2017. Prior to that, I did community social work with the Joining Forces for Families in the Department of Human Services and in the Darbo-Worthington area. And I learned so much doing this job that I really, again, glad that I was able to do that. I think since the beginning, I was very interested to work with the immigrant community. I want to say immigrant community. I know this country has been found with the immigrants, but the people that really live that experience that we are seeing right now, that's not very fortunate sometimes. So I think I was always drawn to work with I speak Spanish, so when people that did not speak English, and trying always to make connecting them with resources. I by no means am an expert on anything. I'm going to tell you later about how the Immigration Affairs Office started and where we are right now. But it's because I think without even knowing and the advocacy that I do or I did, plus the collaborations that I have, with the army of volunteers and colleagues and friends that we do, I think we sort of advance a little bit in that area. But as you mentioned, Brenda, and all of you, my in this panel, it's just like 37 years ago, and then the needle is still kind of, sometimes it moves a little bit and we go back and forth. So as far as working with the population that we're talking about today, I'm not an expert, but as I said, with the Joining Forces for Families, it's a open door policy program where we assisted anybody that will walk our door. So then little by little, I start working with a lot of people that were, working in the dairy area, farms, and just needing all these key resources. You mentioned language access to basic needs, access, and barriers that many of them are confronting. So, and with Jefferson, I was able to really connect that and this very tragic time with the burial services. And that's when I just started my job as the Immigration Affairs Specialist. So that really, I think, and stuck in my head, like how far behind we were in providing services. And I'm glad that this came a light, with the books, the articles, and then, people like county supervisors like Heidi, saying what's happening here. And, that's when I think we all have an opportunity to make a difference and at least do a much larger advocacy. So, I guess that's kind of what I wanted to share. I will talk a little bit more about how the office started, but I think this type of webinars and meetings and publications really need to happen so all of us can be advocates for the less privileged people. So I'm going to end there.
Thank you, Fabi. Thank you, Fabiola. I think it is so important that perspective, right? Like some of the things that you're doing currently that I think that you are going to be able to share in more detail in our next section, if you will, because I think that this is a great background information, all of the different topics and subjects and experiences and the expertise that you have as you're working with or have talked about or written about the immigrant and dairy farm experience in particular. But I wonder if we can go to kind of like in more detail or looking at how is that, as you have seen and are experts in some of these areas of the immigrant experience, how is that you can talk a little bit more about how does this information can help support the immigrant workers and families, depending on your expertise or area of experience. How do you bring this information to others that want to learn about this area? Any more, maybe, I don't know if we can go back to how we started, Melissa, if you want to share a little bit more about, how you identify some of those services and supporting based on the experience and the story that you've written about, that now you are able to connect those, again, the way that we are supporting immigrant families and workers.
Yeah, it's been really hard to find answers that are useful to folks, to be honest. I get calls all the time now from workers with real problems. A man called me the other week because a coworker got killed on his job. And, people call me who are homeless and who have gotten injured and don't know how to get medical care. And there isn't a lot of places where there's clear answers. I can't just say, oh, go to this person and they'll fix it for you. So there's a really significant information gap and also a legal gap. So I'm not as positive as I should be, but like the reality is like the laws ignore a gigantic group of people. And so it makes it really difficult. I can't imagine for social workers who encounter these problems, like the amount of need, whether it's like a roof for food or how do I get my kid to school, and the very basic ability to move from your home to your work without getting ticketed by police or arrested and possibly deported. It's like, it's really hard. Like one place that we've found that's been really helpful is kind of like the informal social workers in communities, and those for Latino immigrants are the owners of the tienditas, of the little Mexican or Latino stores. We've visited probably 80 stores across the state in the past year and a half. And the people who run them have to learn how their local hospital safety net program works and who the local workers' comp attorney is who might take a case, and who the person is in the school district that can help you enroll your kid. So I think for folks who might be interacting with immigrant families more, it might be helpful to talk to those people, to meet them. Often they're bilingual and they have to because of the nature of their work and their business owners. And then I am seeing some like a sincere interest on the part of law enforcement across the state in like addressing this. Folks, I was talking to the police chief in Whitewater, and some of you might have seen recently that the town of Whitewater got a lot of attention because there was some right-wing media coverage that suggested Biden was busing in hundreds of immigrants, which wasn't exactly true. But the police chief was just really bewildered by how and why all these people showed up, and how do I provide services for them when I don't have the money to do it. So I think there's opportunities with law enforcement to educate and I don't know. I think there's really significant legislative hurdles. Then I think the more attention that is given to them and clarity that farms or factories or meat packing facilities in the state depend on these folks. I think we need to hear from them more, the way Ruth's book does with farmers. I don't know. I think that there's just so many legal gaps that these folks kind of fall through it's just really hard to have solutions or positive answers for people.
Thank you, Melissa. I think you're right. I mean, as the question maybe seemed to assume that there's like answers, right? How do we support the immigrant workers or families? That sometimes is even just identifying the issue or voicing the issue, right? That we're not necessarily staying quiet around that. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Ruth, I wonder if you can provide kind of like, I loved what you mentioned about like, but I do have a little bit of a balance between the stories that we certainly are aware of through some of the research and some of the information that we are hearing from Melissa, but also you have the opportunity to also have been able to see some of that kind of positive aspect of it. But certainly, you know, what do you see in terms of supporting immigrant workers and families in your area?
Just unmuting. Well, first of all, what a triumph Melissa's story was. Like, it led to direct action. It led to something really significant. So that's what, you know, you dream about as a journalist, is that you write a story and it's not just that it's poignant and it's powerful and people are affected by it, but that it leads to actual change. And so for Heidi to pick that up and really make something happen, I think is really like one of the most heartening. That is one of the most heartening stories as a journalist that, you know, you could possibly encounter. So that was a great example of something really happening, people becoming aware of something, and you know, the Dane County Board actually acting to make something different. So that's big. I think the Whitewater case is really interesting also. I went down to Whitewater and talked to people after Ron Johnson and Brian Stile and Breitbart News made a huge deal of, this very distorted spin on what was happening in Whitewater, where over a period of years, a large number of people from Nicaragua had arrived. And are living in the area now between 800 and 1,000 people. They were not bussed there by Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, who's been doing that as a stunt, just bussing migrants to northern cities in order to affect, Democrats. On the local level, that police chief and local officials actually do want to do something constructive. And also, they value having a diverse community. They know that immigrant workers are a huge part of their local economy. They were aced out of shared revenue from our state. So that's, that's an issue in Wisconsin, is that there are local communities like Whitewater that just don't have sufficient resources to run local services, let alone with, some people who need some direct service immediately. So that was the reason that he wrote the letter to Biden, I think the police chief. And one of his top issues, he thinks, is that the state of Wisconsin, as the Republican-dominated legislature, needs to end the ban on driver's licenses for undocumented workers, which has been in place since 2007 and has increased people's insurance rates, has increased accidents, has left police forces in places like Whitewater unable to identify drivers and not knowing when they're approaching a car that they've pulled over, whether they're dealing with somebody coming home from work at night who can't get a license because of their immigration status, or whether it's somebody who's got guns in the car and they should be afraid. At least it heightens fear and ignorance, and it's expensive and it's dangerous. So that was interesting. After being used as this big national right-wing figure, the police chief basically said, well, we need to restore driver's licenses. I think that might be the most obvious, immediate state policy issue that could change to help immigrant workers in Wisconsin is changing that law. And it's interesting because there have been coalitions of groups, the Dairy Business Association, which is pretty conservative, and Voces de la Frontera, working together to lobby legislators to try to restore driver's licenses, and also working together to allow immigrant workers to walk out of their job and go to the Capitol to do lobbying, which is hard on a dairy farm, which is a 24/7, 365-day a year job. So I think there has been some consciousness raising and some coalition building, particularly around the issue of driver's licenses. On that, just the last thing I'll say is just on that balance issue that you talked about at the beginning, sort of, not looking at people necessarily just as victims, but also understanding. I mean, the president of Mexico describes workers in the United States who are sending back money to Mexico, which represents a larger share of the economy in Mexico than petroleum in that petroleum exporting country, right? It's huge. It's like, a huge amount of money. He describes them as living heroes. And people really, they kind of take that on. People are working really hard. And if you talk to people in Whitewater, they'll say that this immigrant community that has come to their town, far from being this huge burden, as has been portrayed by, Ron Johnson, are amazing people who are working really hard and contributing. So I think that's really important. I think people need to know that, and just to understand a little bit more about who their neighbors are and who these workers are, and to break the isolation that really kind of comes with agricultural work and being isolated, but also just to understand our complicity and our dependence, on an economic system that's leaning really hard on this disempowered group of folks. So those are some of my thoughts. I think driver's licenses is probably the most important thing on a Wisconsin statewide level. Yeah,
great point. Thank you so much. I completely see all of the different stories and descriptions of not only the data and information that you share, but also the stories that Melissa and you have, and how you're really putting together like a full story of what this group of people, dairy workers, really bring to the conversation. So Heidi, wondering if you can go next, just sharing a little bit more about again, not the solutions necessarily, but like, what do you see as supporting immigrant workers and families?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think the problem of having employment coupled with housing. So like if you lose your job and you lose your place to live at the same time, maybe because you also like lost a leg or a hand or something, like, and you're getting fired, but you're also losing your spot. Now, what do? You're worried about your survival. What do you do if when you have, if you maybe have children with you? This housing fund, I really want the study to include a continuum of services, because there's emergency housing and shelter that's needed. People need a place to go to be able to, when that happens, right? So that they can, enforce their workers' rights, but also, connect then to new, hopefully stable housing if such housing is, available. So that's a huge problem, that lack of security and stability, and is another example of a loophole in tenant protection law in Wisconsin, where if you are, being provided free housing as a compensation for your work, you're not subject to the residential rental practices rule that protects other tenants in our consumer protection law. So, and Melissa had talked obviously about like the inspection aspect and regulatory aspect of just like housing safety standards and things like that. But just like, being subject to being locked out, kicked out, right, is really harmful and traumatic. So I think we could change the law to get rid of that loophole. But in the meantime, we definitely need to address the need for emergency housing all the way to stable and permanent housing. It really doesn't exist right now. And it should be provided not by the boss, so that kind of thing doesn't happen.
Thank you. This is very important. Again, I wish we have more time to really go in depth into some of the conversations that we're having. But Fabi, really quick, I wonder if you can also help us by answering that, like what else, again, not the solution, but what else can we do to either highlight or the actual actions to support immigrant families, workers and families?
So here's the thing, and I hope the audience is really, audience in this call is kind of catching up this. So the advocacy and let's do something, it comes from different areas, right? We have government, we have policy, we have, publishers, we have all of that. All of that has to come together. And I think for us in our Immigration Affairs Office, we really recognize right away that the legal assistance, immigration legal assistance is huge. We need that and we don't have as much. So we have a lot of lately asylum seekers that are coming and working in the dairy farms. And they have 1 year to apply for their asylum. And then after that, 5 months to apply for their work permit. If we don't give them the tools to do that, they're always going to be there. That's, always going to be working in very unhuman conditions sometimes. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about how this office was created, just because it's a very minuscule thing that we are doing, but if we, we can talk days and months and years, but I think, we need to be doing something about that. So this Office of the Immigration Affairs started on October 17 with one staff that was me as an immigration affairs specialist, took the job as a social worker, not knowing what was I doing. And then, so a lot of factors occur from that time to now. First, as you know, the previous administration political campaign, constant attacks to the immigrant community, especially the undocumented community, was so eminent that created fear and anxiety, not only for this vulnerable population, but for other agencies here in Dane County. And I'm just going to talk about Dane County because that's the area that I work with. So again, during that previous administration, the attacks on immigrants and the impact of their safety was so eminent. For example, DACA was terminated. Then, Muslim bans, the changes in public charge, the withholding funding from sanctuary cities, and many other things really what we witnessed at that time, the family separation, ICE raids, and I mean, the list goes on and on and on, right? Another big factor was here in Dane County, as we are, as you probably are kind of starting to hear, is that especially in the Dane County Department of Human Services and other agencies in our community, really I'm still unfamiliar with immigration policies and procedures. So agencies start to see more people that are mixed status, more people that come into the system, and really with lots of barriers, and language barriers are huge, still are. So then, so as all this was evolving, then county supervisors, then county executive policy, and some other advocates got together in a collaborative with the city of Madison, and did grant from Vida Institute of Justice to really start working on this and detentions and all of that. As you know, and on September 21st, 2018, we had the big ICE raid in Wisconsin. So 80 people, I think 83 people in Wisconsin were detained, 20 from Madison. And really, we were not ready. We were not ready. At that time, I was the social worker trying to do some immigration work. My phone number was given in a press conference. It was 4 days of horror. I had like more than 500 plus phone messages in my phone. And that's the time when I decided to really verbalize my frustration, my anxiety, and said, look, this isn't a job for one social worker. We need budget, we need more staff. So then we got, at that time, again, with the assistance of county supervisors and other advocates, they gave me a $30,000 a year of budget at a full-time social worker. Later on, the budget was increased to 7,000, so that's that. And then, we're very lucky in Dane County, we have hospitals and all of that do donations to our office. So basically, right now, we have, full-time social worker myself. I have 2 full-time bilingual bicultural social workers, 1 LT, and this year, county exec put another a budget for a social services specialist. So we grown to 5 people, right? I tell you this, especially if social workers are out, listening, students and all of that. It's just that, something needs to happen, unfortunately, sometimes, to create these initiatives. Now we are a unit in the Department of Human Services. We are still social workers, but we work with immigration attorneys. We do all the social work stuff, advocacy, case management, and all of that. But at the same time, we are partnering with the Community Immigration Law Center to do the Pro Se Clinic. We do consultations with them, with immigration attorneys. After that, we do a big orientation, first of all. Because right now, as we're speaking, we have a lot of new asylum seekers coming, and they don't know where to go. So we do monthly orientations to say, hey, this is the way, these are the things that you need to know as an asylum seeker. Then, we connect them with immigration attorneys. After that, there is this Pro Se Clinic, which right now we're, at capacity. And so at least people can start applying for their immigration, for their asylum application, and later on work permit. So there is a lot of things that as social workers we can do. We need to partner, and we need to really be out there and step aside of our comfort zone to make things happen. I think I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Fabi. Again, I wish we had more time. I always think like an hour and a half, that's a lot, but not enough, never enough. So just very quickly, because I know that we are moving on with some of the, with time, and I want to make sure that we get to some of the questions. But so the last question that we have, if you will, of the for all of you is, can very specific about social workers. Question of social workers. What can social workers do to support? But I want to include another specific shift, if you will, if we can add a question from the audience that said, can any of you share any creative ideas of shifting dominant culture or perspective that might build on strengthen alliances? So to me, again, what is that possibility of social workers, in particular of that profession, right, connected to our work, and many of us, the 136 people that are listening today, but specifically about how can we motivate or the creative ideas to motivate the change in perspective that can build or strengthen alliances. Anyone? Maybe I can open it up for anyone that would like to address this.
Well, I just want to say I did put the link to the Puentes Bridges nonprofit group in the Q&A, because I think on that kind of bigger question about what do you do to combat this increasingly dangerous climate? I mean, it is really something. The Republicans have decided to run against immigrants in the 2024 national election. So it's a lot to do. And I think the antidote to that is for people to really understand who people are and know them as people and their individual stories. And that is a lot of what the Puentes Bridges program is about. There's a lot of Republican farmers who are utterly and completely dependent on their undocumented workforce, and they have really kind of grown through understanding better what those issues are, and they could come and talk in your area. So that's just one suggestion on the sort of the dominant culture issue.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's important to just talk about what's real and what's not, because there's a gigantic gap between rhetoric and reality.
Yeah.
I'll just say quickly on the social work question, I'm interested in this question because I have an adult daughter who's interested in social work, and she has had some very contrasting experiences kind of working a little bit in the field. One of those experiences was in refugee resettlement, where she was shocked as an intern to be asked to write a manual for people who are being resettled in this area that gave them parenting advice. I mean, she was recently out of college. She doesn't have any helpful parenting advice to offer. And she found that there is a tradition in social work that is very condescending. And she was uncomfortable about it. And then there's the social justice tradition, which is obviously what this conference is all about, and sort of solidarity work. And I think the very interesting observation by Christine Newman-Ortiz of Voces that immigrant workers, because they are so essential to the U.S. economy, through Voces, I feel like she's built not just sort of an immigrant services organization, but an organization that is about, it's more on the model of labor organizing, and it's a sense of people's power as workers. And I think that's a very different feeling. So I think that's something to consider as a social worker, is sort of what kind of work you're doing and whether it fits into that sort of old-fashioned white gloves assimilation motivated model, or whether it's really solidarity work. And yeah, so that's it. I'll let other people who are more expert.
Thank you so much for that point. Anyone else?
So since I'm a social worker and not an expert, right? This is just my experience here. So one thing that we need to understand is that people that we work with, nobody wanted to hear their problems. I mean, us, do you want a social worker come to your life and tell you how to raise your kids, or what are you doing if you have some addictions and all of that? So I think it is, really a human, we really need to understand what we wanted to do, as you were saying, as a social workers. We're not going to change anything if we are going to go with a manual or a program. It really gets me sometimes. I think we are used to say, okay, so-and-so needs food. Oh, is there a program for this? Is this a program for that? Is this a panel? There isn't one that's going to fit, an individual or a family. That's why I was saying that it is very important for us as social workers to really come up with initiatives. The old ways that we were working, or we learn how to work with people, especially in in the context of what we are talking about, is not going to work. This is something new. We need to teach, or we need to learn about the intersectionality between social work and immigration. Nobody. So you're not going to come up with a book or with a step by step what to do with this population. I really encourage anybody, not only social workers, to really engage with organizations that are doing. You mentioned Voces de la Frontera, huge, right? I mean, we work with them daily, work with the Open Doors to Refugees, work with, so collaborate more and then learn and be humble and really, because we don't know what's going on. We're not even touch about mental health services, right now. People that are coming with all these traumas and all of that. The driver's license, whenever I have to talk and do advocacy, I tell people, in huge meetings, like, look, you and I and all of us together are driving the same streets. And wouldn't you like, for safety concerns, to have people do get their driver's license by passing the test, by learning the law, all of that. So it just makes sense, to make people understand those type of situations. I'm gonna give space. I think we kind of running out of time, so I'm gonna just be quiet.
Almost running out of time. We still have some time. Please, if there's anyone else that can add from your perspective, again, what can a social worker do to support immigrant workers and families, but give that specific kind of twist, if you will, that has, how can we shift creative ideas to shift dominant culture perspective that might build or strengthen alliances?
Hey, and one thing I was thinking about a lot is with the Jefferson story, as a reporter, we're kind of like trained to be very skeptical of everything that we encounter and to, check your facts. Don't just trust the information you're given. I think social workers sometimes wind up in like the worst crises of folks' experiences, whether it's like a domestic violence or some sort of incident. And I think this might be a good lesson to remember how much room for error there can be when talking about immigrants whose first language is not English. And if like law enforcement, for example, was involved to try to find out how law enforcement learned the information that they say is true. And so to confront the situation kind of with like the knowledge that that what you heard could be not correct. I think that might be just a simple lesson. And then for the broader question, I think like what Ruth spoke and what she's saying is really helpful. And I came into Wisconsin really surprised that some of the basic things weren't basic to everybody, that you do need an understanding between like a boss and a worker of each other's humanity. And you'd think that would be a given if people work together, but it isn't a given, and it isn't a given in Wisconsin. And I've met a lot of Wisconsinites so far who are very horrified and surprised and shocked to know who their neighbors even are, or where they come from. Like this conversation with the Whitewater police chief the other day. And so I think the more, we've met farmers who treat their workers like animals, and a lot of workers who feel like they're treated worse than the cows that they care for. So I do think the more basic interactions between people as individuals who have families and have a history it might seem so obvious, but I think just the more we can remind each other of each other's humanity, I guess the more hopeful we can be for progress.
Absolutely. Hope is my word of this year. So thank you for that reminder. Anyone else wants to add to this particular question? Heidi?
Sure.
ahead.
I mean, this might sound really simple or obvious, but like, social workers, when you're doing direct service, you like what you see and what you're experiencing, like that information that is so valuable to policy makers. And like if Fabi hadn't, been advocating in the community behind her, hadn't been advocating for the office and the services needed, you know, that office wouldn't have happened, you know, and wouldn't be continuing to grow. There's tremendous need, and we need to hear about it. I mean, I work in legal aid, so I every day I'm working with families who are facing all sorts of systems of oppression and unjust, you know, legal proceedings, but there's a lot of policymakers that also, and here I was still quite sheltered from the experience of immigrant dairy workers in Dane County because of the nature of my practice. So it's so important, I think, to really know, like, you know, who is in local government, because local government is more accessible too. And we have some restrictions, but there are things that local government can do. So it's important to know who it is that represents you or the area and the communities you serve, and reach out and share with them what needs you are seeing and what you're doing, because they might not know. There's a good chance they may not have heard that at all. So I just think that direct experience and how you can advocate based on those needs is hugely necessary and important, because, you know, there's all sorts of paid, you know, lobbyists that are going to get the ear of these folks. They need to hear about the folks that can't afford to have paid lobbyists. They need to hear from folks who are serving, you know, vulnerable communities. You also have the power of your voice.
Thank you so much. You're convincing me to go back to school and study social work. No, just kidding. I have many of you that are so amazingly experts in your area. So the last couple of minutes for each one of you, I wonder if you can just share final thoughts, final words, if you will, or as you have seen some of the conversations in the chat and the Q&A, wondering if you maybe want to address one of those questions. I can open it up for anyone. Again, just a couple of minutes for each one of you. We could start with how we begin, I guess, with Melissa. I wonder if you don't mind sharing final words, or if there's anything that comes to mind in terms of some of the questions.
Sorry, lost the mute button. No, I mean, they're all really good questions. I wish that the answers could be more positive. I haven't heard of anybody in Dane County inspecting or visiting farm worker housing. Like, state laws need to change for some of this to happen. And a lot of this is complaint-based systems, which is tricky if you're in the precarious situation of depending on your boss for your job and for your housing. I think the one hopeful thing which has been said is change is possible at the very local level, even in places where it seems impossible, like Wisconsin. And I don't know, if you see something, speak up, talk to a reporter, talk to your local elected official, talk to whoever. I've seen really cool meetings that have happened in different parts of the state between unexpected characters together when they feel like they're in a safe place and can acknowledge the thing that everybody knows is true, but when you can say it out loud and talk to each other about it, it's helpful and can kind of create moments of shared humanity and empathy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ruth?
Well, thinking about the big picture, you know, what do you do in this really toxic political climate? And I have been doing some reporting on labor trafficking, which is another really dark area of this general subject. And it just is so striking, the disconnect between what our economy is demanding of people and what the rhetoric is. Like, if we really got rid of all these immigrant workers, we would have multiple industries collapse overnight. But also the degree to which we're all enmeshed in an economy that turns out to depend on the forced labor of Central American children, preteens, some of them. So, you know, that, I think uncovering that and understanding that is really important. And I also think my takeaway from writing my book was that it was kind of a break from toxic partisanship. And that when you talk to people on an individual level, when you get down from the, you know, the hype of, you know, our increasingly awful national political conversation on this stuff, people are human beings and they are capable of recognizing other people's humanity. And there is real hope in that. And I think part of what is important to recognize is that, you know, that the strain, like it would be easy for a quick takeaway from our conversation to be that these dairy farmers need to be cracked down on and they are exploiting these workers and they need to pay better wages. And all of that is true, but it's also an industry that's in collapse. I mean, it's really, you know, there's a crisis going on for people in rural areas, both in Wisconsin and in other parts of the world. And so understanding that what that bigger economic picture is and the kind of demands it puts on people, like we insist that we have to have a workforce where you have to cram yourself in the trunk of a car and sneak across the border in order to do this labor that we depend on. And we have an economy where, you know, we're losing farms at a rate of 1 a day now in Wisconsin. So there is some like recognition of like, what do we really think is a reasonable life and what are reasonable demands of people, and it's kind of understanding that picture instead of this very Punch and Judy politics. I think that's possible when people realize they have a personal stake in it. So I do feel that it's hopeful. And I do think that the person who asked about like what could be done to help shift the frame of reference could contact John Rosenau and Mercedes Falk at Puentes and get them to come talk to farmers in your area, because there is some room for something other than this very simplistic national dialogue to be.
Yeah.
happening
Thank
on
you.
this issue.
Thank you so much. Just one more minute. Anyone else?
I'm just going to
Fabi-
say very quickly that I feel that, you know, this receiving our, especially immigrant people here, receive them with dignity and not charity. Many people are, you know, oh, you know, it feels good for me to do this, to do that. But I think, you know, we need to also shift that thinking, do it with dignity, because people, I mean, I could have give you examples of people that came here and they're doing great. And it's not like this poor community. Latinos, we come on all kinds of shapes and with different education and all of that. And some of them, you know, don't have the documentation, but they still contribute to this country. So just think about that. And then, you know, as you're saying, we need to talk to everybody and sit down with the table with people that are even really radical and anti-immigrant.
Yeah. One more minute, Heidi.
Oh, did you call me? Oh.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see.
Final words. And
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just humbled to be a part of this panel and this group. It's such an important topic. And I think, you know, I certainly still have a lot to learn, but I'm just, you know, inspired by, you know, all of the work being done from journalism to direct service to advocacy. I think, you know, and to learn about the hopeful experiences too. I think that's more likely to happen at, you know, the local level, at the community level. I think that's our charge.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I think I'm going to ask Laura to come back and help us close the session. There are many questions, of course, there still are there, and feedback, a very positive feedback. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Laura, I help us closing this time today.
Wow. So obviously, first and foremost, thanks, Brenda, Fabiola, Melissa, Ruth, and Heidi. This conversation is not an end point, I hope, for any of us, but for some of us, maybe a reinvigoration, kind of a recharge. For some of us, a discovery. For some of us, all new, and for some of us, just a reframe. And I want to go back to what actually was sort of Ruth and Fabiola both shared about what the role of social workers in this state can be. And in this time, I think 2024 year is going to be a year where the way we think about and talk about and work on the issue of immigrant workers and immigrant families and their rights are going to be critical. And the questions, you know, the answers that I heard from all the panelists is thinking about humility. Is a good social worker word. The humility to understand that you need to learn and be in relationship with people, that you need to collaborate more. There was a call consistently for more collaboration, more conversation with even people you think you can't agree with, that we need to be choosing solidarity and seeing power in the community instead of pretending we as social workers have gifts to give. This is a chance to see the power in this community, try and find the places that will amplify that, and that we need to really communicate with care. And each one of you has done such communication with such care in each of the places that you are located, and it's making an enormous difference in this world. And I'm really honored that we got to have you together. So that's my little thoughts. A few things. Please, yes, do take these ideas into your world. And know that you've got a half-hour break now. And at 2 o'clock, Kelly Hayes will be doing our closing plenary. She's got the question she's seeking to answer with us is, how much discomfort is the whole world worth? And I think it's so much in line with some of the questions here. I think she has some really powerful things to say about what organizing looks like and what solidarity looks like. And I hope you all can be part of that or watch it later, because it will be recorded. And she'll be in conversation with a couple of social workers as part of that. Please do watch for an email with the link to the evaluation for today's breakout session. And remember that you will be getting an email regarding CEUs. And remember, you can come back and watch this again or send it to your friends and tell them to watch this again. The recording will be up sometime early next week. And I think that covers everything. We got a couple minutes in case anybody wants to do a last shout out. I know that last night, the Dane County celebrated 25 years of service from Fabiola Hamdan. So talk about a social worker who is thinking about what that radical vision of social work can be and living it every day in this community. So thank you for that, Fabiola. I don't know if we got just a minute left. So now I'm done. All right, go out into the world.